The cameras were rolling, the crowd was buzzing, and no one expected what was about to unfold on stage. When Jasmine Crockett appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, viewers anticipated clever banter and light political humor. Instead, what they witnessed turned into one of the most unexpected live confrontations in recent television history. What began as a pointed exchange quickly spiraled into something no one, not even Colbert himself, could control. Make sure to like and subscribe to see how it all unfolded. In a hushed auditorium filled with expectant murmurs, the stage was set for a night that would forever alter the tone of live television. The cameras hovered over every inch of the impeccably lit set as Stephen Colbert prepared his opening monologue, his eyes scanning the audience for hints of amusement and approval. Behind the polished smile and quick wit, however, there simmered an anticipation unknown even to those closest to him. The quiet intensity of the moment led observers to wonder, had something deep and provocative been set in motion long before the show began? Tonight was meant to be a display of clever repartee and political satire that had come to define Colbert's every appearance. But just as the opening jokes began to draw nods and polite laughter, the unexpected arrival of Jasmine Crockett sent ripples through the atmosphere. Entering with a purposeful stride and a resolute look in her eyes, Jasmine carried with her an air of undeniable defiance and unfiltered honesty. There was something magnetic about her presence that hinted at the controversy brewing beneath the surface. What did it mean when a guest carried the weight of their convictions so visibly? Could tonight mark the tipping point where political performance art transcended scripted humor to become something far more raw and unpredictable? From the moment the host introduced her, whispers of anticipation mingled with the applause that greeted her entrance. Jasmine moved with an assured grace, her every word calibrated to challenge and provoke. The subtle tension between her assertive aura and Colbert's refined demeanor made the audience lean in, their attention captured as if by an irresistible gravitational pull. In the early minutes of their exchange, small jabs began to punctuate the conversation. A raised eyebrow here, a pointed remark there. Yet beneath these seemingly light exchanges lay a deeper current of unresolved grievances and ideological clashes that both drew a laugh and stoked the inner fires of dissent. Who among the viewers could have predicted that a mere on-air jest would escalate into a confrontation that would have them questioning the boundaries of civility and the power of words? As the discussion veered toward contentious topics, the conversation took on a more confrontational tone. Jasmine's voice, steady yet edged with passionate defiance, began to target the very foundations of the well-practiced humor that Colbert was celebrated for. Her words, dripping with pointed criticism, questioned not just political ideologies, but also the underlying assumptions that governed the world of televised debates. With every carefully chosen phrase, she challenged the norms of what was acceptable on live television. The audience, now silent in parts and rapt in others, bore witness to a battle of wills that transcended mere talk. It was as if each phrase laid down a gauntlet for not only Colbert, but for the cultural status quo at large. Amid the escalating verbal back and forth, Colbert's expression shifted subtly. The initial amusement faded into a more contemplative focus, marking the transition from playful banter to a charged encounter loaded with personal stakes and public scrutiny. How far could a spirited discussion escalate before it transformed into a personal clash that reverberated through every corner of the studio? What was the breaking point where performance gave way to raw emotion? As the tension built, and every pause between their words grew heavier with unspoken challenges, the air itself seemed to thicken with the promise of an impending eruption. With the first sparks of confrontation now unmistakable, the stage was set for what would become one of the most talked-about moments in live television history. The audience was not merely watching. They were emotionally invested, each viewer questioning the shifting power dynamics unfolding before their eyes. The narrative of the evening had changed course, veering away from simple humor to become a microcosm of larger societal debates. In that charged moment, the promise of drama, the thrill of confrontation, and the unknown journey ahead had everyone asking, what would be the catalyst for what came next? When the laughter had died down and the undercurrents of defiance grew louder, it was clear that this story was only just beginning. Let us now move deeper into the unfolding drama, where every word carries weight and the stakes become ever more personal. What began as subtle tension had now swelled into something undeniably volatile. The studio, once a space for laughter and rehearsed dialogue, felt more like a courtroom without walls, judgments forming silently in the minds of the audience. As each new exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Stephen Colbert peeled away the pretense of civility. The lights still glared from above, the cameras still captured every angle, but the room no longer felt scripted. It was live, unfiltered, and slipping into something dangerously real. Colbert leaned forward in his chair, his smile now faint and fixed, his posture tight. He had weathered his share of controversial guests before, but something about Jasmine's tone cut deeper than usual. Perhaps it was her refusal to laugh along with his jabs, or maybe it was the calm certainty in her voice when she dissected his brand of humor as nothing more than smirking complicity in systems that need dismantling. Her words landed not like jokes but indictments. "You've made a career out of making people comfortable in their ignorance," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "What are you doing with your platform, really? Challenging power or flattering it?" Gasps murmured through the audience like the first low rumbles of a coming storm. Colbert blinked slowly, registering the insult not just as a guest's sharp line, but as something that questioned the core of who he had become. For a moment the witty host, known for his quick comebacks, sat speechless, caught in the awkward vacuum that follows a blow no one saw coming. He chuckled, but it was hollow. "So I'm the villain now?" he said, tilting his head. "Good to know." But the audience was divided. Some cheered, others sat stunned, and Jasmine, unshaken, pressed forward. "I'm saying you have power, Stephen. You could use it to elevate the unheard instead of roasting the obvious," she continued, her voice calm but undeniably firm. "But you've settled into something safer, something convenient." That word, convenient, landed like a slap across the face. It suggested compromise, comfort, complacency. And for a man who once thrived on provocative satire, it was a damning assessment. His fingers tapped the side of his desk, a telltale sign that his patience had thinned. "Are you lecturing me on how to run my show?" he said finally, his tone a careful mix of disbelief and simmering irritation. "Because if so, I think you might have wandered into the wrong studio." Now the line had been drawn. Whatever previous sense of mutual respect had existed was gone. Jasmine sat back, lips pursed, eyes steady. She knew the line had been crossed, and she had no intention of retreating. This wasn't just a debate. It was a philosophical and generational clash playing out live, where reputations were on the line, and the audience, both in the room and at home, had become jurors. And still, Stephen pushed. "I don't need a lecture. From someone who spends more time attacking the media than contributing meaningfully to it," he said, his voice rising ever so slightly. "You came here to criticize me? Fine. But don't act like you're doing the world some great favor." Jasmine's laugh, soft but sharp, sliced through the tension. "The world doesn't need favors, it needs truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't make for a great punchline," she said. The crowd erupted again. Cheers, murmurs, confused glances. This was no longer entertainment. It had become a confrontation about values, legacy, and the price of popularity. What had started as a public appearance was now a referendum on identity, responsibility, and the role of media in shaping the world's conscience. Colbert stood, slowly, as if to physically reassert control over the space. He paced slightly, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on his desk, eyes focused not on Jasmine, but somewhere past her. Perhaps he was searching for the joke that would end the awkwardness, or maybe he was asking himself whether any joke could. Then he turned to her, voice quiet but crisp. "You know, I invite people here to have conversations, not tear-down sessions. But if you wanted to provoke a reaction, congratulations. You got it." Jasmine raised her brow. "And what will you do with it now?" It was a question that hung unanswered in the air. There was no witty sign-off, no cue for commercial break, only a live audience sitting in stunned silence, waiting to see if the moment would collapse or catch fire. And Colbert, for the first time in years, looked uncertain. The tension had reached a fever pitch. All that remained was to see how he would respond to the wound she had opened, not just in him, but in the narrative he had carefully built over decades. The momentary silence after Jasmine's last question was more profound than any applause. Stephen Colbert stood frozen, one hand gripping the desk while his gaze lingered on the floor between them. For a man who had made a career out of commanding the room, it was a rare instance of pause, measured not in seconds but in seismic emotional weight. The crowd waited, the crew waited, even Jasmine waited. But what exactly were they all waiting for? An apology? A rebuttal? Or a loss of composure? That would betray the very image Colbert had cultivated for so long. He exhaled sharply and sat back down, but not without a flash of something darker in his expression, an undercurrent of resentment barely masked by a practiced smile. "Well," he began, "this conversation's turned into something special, hasn't it?" The audience gave a few unsure laughs. Some clapped, others glanced at one another nervously, unsure of how to react. The mood had shifted so drastically that the boundaries between host and guest, between satire and sincerity, had all but vanished. But Jasmine wasn't laughing. "You say special. I say overdue," she replied, leaning forward, as if trying to shorten the emotional distance that had ballooned between them. "People in power, even the ones we like, need to be pushed. And if this is uncomfortable, maybe that's the point." The word power struck a particular nerve. Colbert's brow tightened. He knew the implication, that despite his progressive branding and nightly monologues against corruption, he had become part of the establishment he once parodied. And now here she was, calling it out on his own stage, in front of his own audience. He narrowed his eyes. "Is this really about me, or about the role you wish you had?" Gasps rippled through the room. The insinuation was unmistakable. And, for the first time, Jasmine's calm began to crack, not with anger but with a sharp, incredulous glare. "That's beneath you," she said, her voice low and measured. "And honestly, I think you know it." Her disappointment was palpable, and it did more damage than outrage ever could. Colbert looked away. He had tried to reclaim control by dismissing her challenge as ambition. But the moment he did, he had given away more than he realized. He had shown the vulnerability he so often hid behind irony. A producer off-stage whispered into a headset, clearly weighing the risk of cutting to commercial. But no one moved. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was theater, raw and unrehearsed. Suddenly, Jasmine reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She placed it gently on the desk in front of him. "What is this?" Colbert asked, his tone wary. "A list," she said. "Of names. Journalists, whistleblowers, activists, people who've been silenced, mocked, or ignored while entertainers play politics with no accountability. People your show never talks about." He looked down at it, but didn't touch it. The silence in the room was now suffocating. "I came here tonight knowing exactly what this would cost me," Jasmine continued. "I know how your fans will spin this. I know the headlines, but I also know what silence costs. And someone needs to say it. Your jokes don't hurt the powerful anymore. They protect them." Her words struck like a hammer. There was no shouting, no name-calling, just the brutal finality of a truth spoken plainly. And in that moment, even Colbert seemed to feel it. He looked at the paper again, then back at her, this time without the smirk, without the armor of sarcasm. "You came here for a fight," he muttered quietly. "And you got it." "No," Jasmine said. "I came here to make sure you listen." The camera cut briefly to the audience. Wide eyes, hands over mouths, people leaning forward, locked in disbelief. There was no script for this. No laugh track. No monologue to wrap things up in a bow. Just raw tension vibrating through the set like an electric current. The kind of moment people would talk about for weeks. Colbert, realizing he had no clever line to retreat to, simply nodded. For a breath he let the silence stretch. Perhaps the first time all night he truly listened. Then, slowly, he pushed the paper back toward her. "You want people to see this?" he asked. Jasmine gave a single nod. "Then we'll show it," he said. And just like that, the temperature in the room shifted. The audience, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath, settled into stunned stillness. Stephen had taken a step, not a surrender, but a recognition. And with that, the next stage of the confrontation had begun. Because now that the walls were cracked, what truths would spill through them? The decision to show the list was more than a gesture. It was a rupture in the polished world Colbert had curated for years. As cameras zoomed in, the sheet of paper appeared on screen, each name slowly scrolling across the monitors as the studio. Lights dimmed to a deep contemplative hue. No music, no punchline. Just the names. The audience shifted in their seats, unsure of how to respond. It was not the kind of moment late-night television was built for. This was not satire. This was reckoning. Stephen leaned forward again, his hands now folded tightly beneath his chin. "Tell me about one of them," he said. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Maria Esperanza," she began. "A local reporter in Texas. She uncovered a trafficking ring protected by corrupt city officials. She was found dead in her apartment. No investigation, no coverage, no outrage." Colbert winced slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "Your team had the story. I sent it to one of your producers last year," she added. Nothing happened. The weight of her accusation hung in the air like smoke. She wasn't accusing Colbert of malice. She was accusing him of omission. And in a world dominated by platforms and personalities, omission was sometimes more dangerous than lies. "I don't remember that submission," he replied carefully. "You wouldn't," she shot back, "because you don't have to. That's the problem." For a man used to dissecting politics with a scalpel of irony, this confrontation felt like surgery without anesthesia. Every word Jasmine spoke peeled back another layer of convenience, exposing the soft underbelly of performative dissent. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She was trying to make him see himself. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why come here? To do this? You could have gone anywhere." Her eyes did not leave his. "Because you still have power. And somewhere beneath this studio and your team of writers and the polished clips that go viral every week, I think part of you knows how to use it." His face softened, almost imperceptibly, but enough. There was no applause. There was no commercial break. What happened next unfolded quietly, almost reverently. "I want to play a clip," Stephen said, gesturing toward his producer. "Not one we prepared." The control room scrambled. The screen behind the stage lit up with grainy footage. Maria Esperanza, standing in front of a city building, clutching a folder of documents. Her voice was barely audible over the street noise, but her passion came through crystal clear. She spoke of corruption, of danger, of her refusal to stay quiet. The audience watched in stunned silence. Some reached for tissues. Others sat frozen, the reality of the moment washing over them. When the clip ended, Colbert turned back to Jasmine. "That story should have been told. I missed it. I don't know what else to say but that." She nodded once, acknowledging the admission but not indulging it. Then help tell it now. All of it. And with that, the conversation shifted again. No longer adversarial, but something closer to a truce. Not a comfortable one, not a cozy handshake, but the mutual recognition that something bigger than ego or ratings had emerged between them. Still, not everyone was ready to let it go. A voice from the back of the audience rang out, clear, accusatory. "You're just trying to hijack the show for your own agenda." The entire room froze. Jasmine turned slowly toward the heckler, but before she could respond, Stephen stood. "No," he said firmly, with a volume and clarity that silenced the outburst. "She's trying to do what I should have done a long time ago. Pay attention." The heckler fell quiet. The rest of the audience erupted in applause, not for Jasmine or for Stephen alone, but for the courage to face uncomfortable truths on a platform that so often sanitized them. Jasmine looked back at him. "Then let's keep going." He nodded. "We're not done yet." And they weren't. Because while the list was shown, and the stories had begun to surface, the consequences of such a public reckoning were only just starting to take shape. Headlines were already being written. Commentators were preparing their segments. Social media was beginning to churn. And somewhere beyond the cameras, the very systems Jasmine had spoken of were paying attention too. What would they do now? And more importantly, what would Stephen Colbert do next? Now that his comfortable perch had been shaken, and millions were watching. The air backstage felt heavier than it had in years. Colbert stepped off set briefly, pacing the hallway with a kind of restless introspection that unnerved his team. His stage manager approached cautiously. "We've got 6 minutes left." "What do you want to do?" Stephen glanced toward the floor, then back to the studio door where Jasmine still sat calmly, flipping through the list again. "We finish," he said, "but not with jokes." Back on stage, the crowd sat in unusual silence. There were no band cues, no warm-up laughs, no studio gimmicks to reset the tone. It was just Colbert and Jasmine, no longer combatants, but uneasy collaborators in a moment neither had planned. He looked into the camera. "We've spent a lot of time trying to make the world easier to swallow," he said, his voice even but heavy. "We laugh, we groan, we move on. But maybe sometimes we should stop and listen, especially when the message isn't easy to hear." Jasmine remained quiet, allowing his words to land before stepping back in. "I didn't come here expecting you to agree with everything I said," she admitted. "But I did hope you'd stop pretending everything can be solved with a punchline." Colbert smiled, this time without irony. "You're right, and it's time we stopped mistaking attention for action." He turned back to the audience. "There are people out there doing real work, risking everything to expose corruption, protect the truth, and hold power accountable. And we haven't done enough to lift them up. That's on us." "On me." Applause swelled, tentative at first, then thunderous. Not because it was expected, but because it was earned. The audience wasn't clapping for a show. They were clapping for a shift. Something authentic had happened, and they knew it. Jasmine leaned in one final time. "So here's my challenge, not just to you, but to everyone watching. Don't let this be a moment that trends for an hour and disappears. Find the names, read their stories, share them, keep them alive." The screen behind them lit up again, not with flashy graphics or a hashtag, but with the full list of names. Clear, unfiltered, unadorned. As it rolled, soft instrumental music swelled. The camera slowly panned across the audience, capturing tear-streaked faces, bowed heads, and the unmistakable stillness that only truth can create. And then, unexpectedly, Colbert walked over to Jasmine and extended his hand. No words, no performance, just a handshake between two people who had collided hard, and had still found common ground in the wreckage. The episode ended without credits, without a joke, without a final wink to the camera. It faded to black with a single line. On screen, "The truth deserves a platform." What happened next, off-camera, was perhaps even more compelling. Within hours, news outlets ran clips of the interview, but most were unprepared for the public response. Viewers flooded social media with demands for more coverage on the stories Jasmine referenced. Independent journalists began sharing their own investigations. Names from the list began trending. Families of those on the list reached out, shocked, and grateful that someone had finally said their names in a place people would hear. Stephen's own team found themselves inundated with requests, some praising, others criticizing, but all engaged. Sponsors called. Executives held late-night meetings. But Colbert didn't waver. The following night, he opened his show with no monologue, no celebrity guest, no laughter. Instead, he introduced a segment titled Stories We Missed, dedicated to the names on Jasmine's list. He even invited her back. Jasmine, for her part, refused to become a regular guest or a token voice. She kept her distance but continued her work, emboldened now by the platform she had cracked open. Her interviews, speeches, and grassroots campaigns found new audiences. She had not come to be liked. She had come to be heard, and she had succeeded. Together they proved something unexpected, that even in a world addicted to sound bites and spectacle, there was still room for uncomfortable conversations, for growth, for change. And in the end, the most shocking part wasn't the insult or the confrontation. It was the transformation of a show, of a host, and, for a brief, honest moment, of an entire audience that stopped laughing long enough to finally listen.